everybody, it's Professor Lynn Manzik again, and I am here with another Photoshop tutorial. This one is about color and texture and how to make it look intentional. Color is vibes, right? Texture is seasoning. Too much of either, and it's prison. Unless you are trying to engage in maximalism, which I will say that is in vogue right now. But we need to learn balance before we can learn how to break those rules of balance. So today we're going to go over adjustment layers, fill layers, selection tools, texture workflow, filters, brush tool basics, transform tools, and a little bit more with those blend layer styles. Let's go ahead and open up Photoshop. Hi friends. So again, if you go into your canvas and go into files, you will find these demo images. We're going to use them again to go over these basic tools today. So I can go again to my download folder. And I do want the bird. Actually, no, I don't necessarily need the bird. I do want this picture, though, of Paul Bill. It's a picture of a building. I am going to use this photo. And what we're going to go over today are something called adjustment layers. And adjustment layers are a way to change the color, tone, and look of a piece. And I am actually going to turn off my grid so we can see this a little bit better. And we are using adjustment layers to change the look and mood of this photo. So we have a colorful photo of this building here, a lot of pinks and blues. But we can use adjustments to change our image and make it look a little bit brighter, more saturated, etc. The typical way we would do this in a destructive manner would be if we went to image, adjustments, and levels here, and you can see this window pops up, and if I pull the sliders, you can see it changes the image. The problem is that it edits the original image, and if I happen to need to go back to that original image, I can't. So we want to do something else. We want to use adjustment layers. So instead of editing the actual existing photo, I can go to layer, new adjustment layer, and I can pull up levels. Typically levels is the first one that you want to use. And you'll see that this slider that popped up in the dialog box earlier now exists here. And I can go in and I can pull these and I can change the contrast. I use levels quite a bit. Levels is my best friend. These thumbnails, you can pick like a lighter value and it'll adjust everything to that. With the black eyedrop tool, I can pick one of the darker areas and it'll adjust everything to that, or you can just manually do it here. And I want it to be a little bit more intense, so I'm going to up that contrast with the middle bar. This is the black point, this is the white point, and this is everything in between. Down here, we can fade everything, fade the whole image to white, or we can fade the whole thing to the black point. Although I will say I don't often use this slider unless I'm test printing. You'll see in the layers that now I can turn that layer on or off, right? Everything that exists below this layer will be affected by this level. So if I copied this layer and I put it above, you can see nothing above that layer is affected by the adjustment layer. You can create masks on your adjustment layers, just so you know. Next up, another popular tool. I just showed you levels, but I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to go to layer, new adjustment layer, and I am going to use curves. And I will just click OK. And again, typically you would probably want to name these, especially if you had different images on your file in your canvas, but we're only using one image, so I am going to only use the standard naming there. But now we have curves. So curves is one of those tools that feels confusing or like wizardry until it clicks, and then you never go back. Although I will admit, I think I personally use levels more than curves, but a lot of people swear by curves. I'll explain it conceptually first and then how to actually use it. So what curves actually is curves controls how dark and light values map to each other. And you can think of it like a volume knob for brightness, but with surgical precision instead of everything louder. So instead of making image brighter, curves let you say only brighten the shadows, darken highlights, but leave midtones alone, and add contrast without crushing detail. You can do this all in curves. I typically do it the harder way in levels and then separately in different in hue and saturation and then color balance. But potato, potato, tomato, tomato. That's how that quote goes, right? So when we look at this graph here, again, the properties show up here. You're looking at a square with a diagonal line, right? And then we have some sort of graph here. So we have the axis, we have a horizontal x-axis, and then we have a vertical, the horizontal x-axis is the original brightness value. So this is left is shadows, right is white, so very much like levels. But now we have the vertical y-axis, which this is new brightness value. So bottom is darker, top is brighter. The diagonal line means everything stays the same. Okay, so what happens when you move the line? Well, we can play around with this line. You can see you can curve it. If I move it up, it's brighter, right? Especially if I move it up into the right. If I move it up and to the left, you can see it gets more contrasty. And the same for down here. You can see that now it's getting dark. So we lift the line up, it's lighter. We lift the line down, it's darker. Okay. So typically the sweet spot for this is a S curve. And you can see I added a point here when I did that, right? And I can go ahead and continue to edit that if I just select it again. And a lot of people swear by this S curve, so you can go in and adjust as needed. And I can even go and move that point down until I get something that fits more when I'm trying to visualize. Again, some people swear by this. I personally am not the biggest fan of doing my contrast in curves, but a lot of people swear by it, so I'm showing it to you. And now I get a little bit more contrast, right? But I'm still losing some of the color, which means I need to go into some color editing. But the result here is we have darker darks, we have brighter brights, and we have more contrast. It looks rich still without being washed out. But I like really saturated tones, so I'm definitely gonna have to go in with hue and saturation to adjust. So levels, people will call it like a ruler. Brightness contrast. I would typically stay away from brightness contrast because let's see where it is right here, because it's really generic. I would say out of the four of these levels and curves, if you are purely a photographer, exposure might be a really good one for you, but typically levels and curves do what we need. So next up on the agenda, I want to show you layer, new adjustment layer. We're going to show you first hue and saturation. So again, I can create a new layer and it'll pop up here. And this will adjust the color. You know, I was complaining about color earlier. I'm actually going to keep the levels too. So you can see that I can move these sliders and then adjust the hue. If I bring it back to 0, this will take us back to where it was. And you'll see that master is selected now. I can go to each channel and I can just purely select those colors. So I can change the red channel, which the building was pink. So it's adjusting those, right? And I can go to cyan and this should adjust the sky and that door a little bit. I can make that more neon. I can amp it up by moving that dark slider. Okay, so that's an example of how hue and saturation would work. Another adjustment would be new adjustment layer, color balance. Okay, I'm going to turn off that last one. And this one we can see, you can go into the shadows, midtones, highlights, and hand pick and adjust these by channel. So I have the blue channel here and the green channel. Again, I can just adjust these this way. These are all the highlights, and I can go into the midtones and adjust these sliders as well to get different vibrances and color mapping. And again, this is a very handy tool. And you can see that with the color balance, it actually still balances the whole mood and tone of the color as in contrast with the hue and saturation, which only specifically changed the hue, saturation, and lightness and darkness separately, so it made it a little bit more harsh. So that's something to remember as well. The other adjustment layer that I'm going to specifically show you, and again, play around with these. You are open and available to use all of them. But the next one I want to show you that's used quite often is gradient map. And I just have a black and white gradient, and you can see that turns it into a black and white image. We can change that gradient to whatever color we want, and then you get, a different type of mood or vibe. Again, I can actually add in other colors to have a midpoint color, and you can play around with that. So that's another option. And with these, you can tone them down too. So I can use that opacity to tone them down and just give it a slight color adjustment, which is really nice. You can do black and white with the gradient this way, as it initially showed when that first gradient dropped. There are also options under layer adjustment for black and white, and I would say sometimes, using that black and white filter is the best bet. Sometimes I do use a gradient depending on how good the middle values are in the in the photo, usually from a phone. And how they really separate into the photo. Sometimes a gradient works better. Okay, so that's it for adjustment layers, but play around with those. Again, you can use, the opacity on here to change it around. You can play around with the blend layers too and see what they do. Like if I go to dissolve, you see I get that textured effect, which is kind of cool. The next thing I want to show you is a fill layer. So if I go to layer, new fill layer, I can go ahead and create a new layer with a fill of my desire. And you might say, what's the point of that? Well, I can then do an opacity change on that layer. So it's just slightly filmed over that original photo. Or again, I can use these blend layers. So I can go through and see what happens when I use some of these blend styles. Again, this is the way I show creativity in Photoshop, because a lot of things that we do in client work and in Photoshop are really strategic and are very strategic and have a methodology and can be rigid. And so this is one of the ways where you can actually use your creativity within that. So play around with that too. Again, I have opacity here. So I'll talk about the difference between opacity and fill later on again. We went over a lot of those selection tools already, but I just want to say we do have this rectangle marquee tool, circle, just a line too. Those are options. The eyedropper is used to pick colors. So I can pick colors from my photo and then it shows up here and over here. Next, we have pen tool, which I haven't talked about this. So this is the same pen tool that we have in Illustrator, and it creates a Bezier path. And you can see now I have a shape. I can edit that shape. I can change the color. There's points on it because it is a vector. It is not a rasterized image. So if we want to rasterize it at any point, you would have to go to the hamburger menu and hit rasterize. Let's see, something else I want to show you are a few filters. So we have, I go back to my photo, I can select my photo. If I go to filter, I can blur. Again, I talked about some of these in the last video, but I just want to show you. So this is motion blur, so I can give it that sort of effect. Noise, I can add noise. So it already has noise because I added that in the channel, in the blend layer channel, but I can add more and I can make it monochromatic, or I can reduce it too. So it's just a little bit less noisy, but it looks pixelated and grainy now, right? So play around with a lot of these, see what they do. Just a note with these filters, every new designer is guilty of it, but you're going to overdo it and everyone is going to know what tools you're using. And the key to good Photoshop usage is leaving no trace. You don't want people to know what you're doing, what you used, how you did it. We want it to be super sneaky. We want to leave no evidence of how we adjusted our image. And that's one, one, it's like a secret recipe. We don't want people to know our secret recipe. And two, it's just everyone's using the same tools. So you want to make sure it's not obvious. Which leads us to the brush tool. And you're going to see this with the brush tool. And many of you are going to be guilty of this too. So I'm going to make a new layer and I can paint, right? I can paint with this brush tool, but I have, and I'm going to bring this layer up above all of these other things so we can really see it. But I have the airbrush brush, the most standard brush in Photoshop. It was the first brush in Photoshop ever. And everyone uses it. Don't use it and make it obvious. Download brush packs, make your own brushes. We'll talk about that in another video, but I downloaded Kyle's. I believe you can get these on the Adobe site now. They might come with Photoshop now too, but you can see, let me find one. Let's use the pastel. If I blow this brush up, you can see it has texture and is a little bit different. You can actually, if you double click here, you can change the direction of it. And there actually is a brush settings panel. If I go to window, brushes, now I have everything here. I can select these and for instance, I have this roller. I love that roller smooth chisel brush. So I have all these options, but I can also go into here and where is it? New brush preset. Um, there it is. Sorry, I got a little lost there. If you're in brushes and you click this folder, you can go into the brushes now, and you can actually like change the spacing of the brush. Um, and you can flip the axis. You can do all sorts of things with these. So there's so many brushes to download. So definitely play around with that as well. And for today, what else was on the list? Transform tool. That was the other thing I wanted to go over. So let's say we had this shape and I'm going to rasterize it. So again, I just want to show you what that does. So I have the pen tool. We can see we have these points here. It's a vector. If I rasterize this layer, now it's no longer editable by its points. So if I want to transform it, I can go to edit, and you can do this with any rasterized layer, and I'm going to go to transform, and you can see we have the typical ones, but we also have skew, perspective, distort. Sometimes I use perspective and it just sends this immediately into perspective to a vanishing point, which is really nice when you're creating a mock-up. You can also use the warp tool, which the warp will create this warp grid, and you can kind of arc it and do all sorts of different things with it. So, and you can see I can click on the mesh and it moves this around. So play around with that. Play around with that mesh and all of these transform tools. Last, what I want to do is I want to show you using something you can do to use textures. So now I'm just going to download a texture, and I'm going to do like a paper watercolor texture. And I can just grab really any of these that you want. But I'm just going to download this. I'm re-downloading it because I've downloaded it apparently before. And then I'm going to right click and open in Photoshop. And I have the camera raw. I'm just going to click open. Sometimes that pops up when it's an actual photo, but that's good because it's not generated, it's actual photo. And I'm just going to copy and paste that and come back over to my working canvas and do Command V. And I'm just going to scale this so it fits. And I'm not super particular about how this fits in because I just want it to cover the whole space. And now I can go into my blend layers and I can give this a paper texture, and I have that diffuse on, so it's harder to see. I just turned it off, but you can see now I have that paper texture covering everything. And again, that's just a way to make your imagery look a little bit cool, a little bit different, and give some different aesthetic. I actually kind of like how this one turned out. I do this demo quite often, but I added in this weird abstract, this weird abstract painting, and I think it's actually kind of interesting. So I might just play around with this for a little bit. But that's it for today. Ooh, I'm gonna lighten it. You can see, and you can just have fun doing this, right? I've done this demo with this photo so many times, and every time I have a different look. I think last year's version was super grungy. This year is kind of giving me like cyber Miami vibes. So you can do a lot with your images in Photoshop using these tools. Thank you for watching. Apologies if I stuttered over my words for this tutorial, but I've been nonstop recording today, and I just honestly, I'm not going to edit this one because I just want to get it out to you before tomorrow. So enjoy. Happy photoshopping.